Hello, I'm here to talk a little bit about data discovery as we do it at Wiley. Before I go into that, what I'd like to just say a little bit about Wiley for those of you who are not familiar with the company. Wiley is an academic and scholarly research publishing company originally founded in 1807 and publishes books and journals and major reference works, otherwise known as encyclopedias of sorts. But it's not all print. We also produce a huge amount of online products and services, training materials and education materials for undergraduate, graduate and continuing education students. Wiley is a global organisation fostering a global learning community. And the strapline you can see at the top is basically the Wiley vision to empower researchers, learners and universities and corporations as well. And that's with the various products and services offered. Within Wiley, we have a content enrichment department, which is where I work as the company resident taxonomist. I've got some 25 years worth of experience working with knowledge organization and thesaurus management, and that's why I came to Wiley to do this job. So we have a vision for content enrichment. As Wiley is a digital first publisher, we have a core competency of enriching content in order to increase its value. So what we want to do is to increase the relevance, increase discoverability, which is really important to the societies that on whose behalf we publish, and increase usage. And this is in order to increase the credibility of the content and the authors, and to realize greater value from content for all of our partners. So before I go into what the kind of requests that come our way, just a quick word about my use of the word taxonomy. I'm using this as a blanket umbrella term for taxonomies, hierarchies, flat lists, and thesauri. I think I borrowed it from Heather Hedden, so acknowledgements to her, but it's just a shorthand so that I don't have to keep repeating myself. So the kind of requests that come our way, these are typically that we're asked to create a brand new taxonomy on behalf of a society, an academic society, in order to represent and classify their content. Another one is they want to reuse a taxonomy which is already in existence from an external source where we have permission to do so. And that would mean adapting it in order to represent the society's content in particular. And finally, another option is to adapt an existing taxonomy which is owned by the society partner. The society partner's existing taxonomy may not be built specifically around their content. It could have been originally built for another purpose, but they want to reuse it for their content. So these are the kind of requests that we get. And I will now go into how we deal with those. So going back to all this content, and this is something that Ramona also talked about, was how do taxonomies help with siloed content? Because, and when I talk about siloed content in this context, I mean siloed within journals, within article issues, journal issues, within books, etc. So one of the biggest tools we've got is obviously our online platform. And that's where all of the content ends up being published. But to help with bringing content out of a silo and this might seem slightly counterintuitive, is the creation of what we call a hub. So that is a dedicated and protected area online for a society in the first instance, so that they can put all their journals in one space. But we're also looking at that to do it with content subject domains lead in what goes into a hub. And the next thing is to create a knowledge model that answers the requirements of a society. So it is mainly academic and research societies that I deal with on a day-to-day basis. Again, you'd think that the creation of the knowledge model would come first and not the hub, but there are more things that a hub represents to society than just being able to deliver a taxonomy. Obviously, most important, we have to, after creating a knowledge model, which I'll describe to you, I think, in the next slide, the content needs classifying using the knowledge model. And then the results of that, the taxonomy, or taxonomies, the classification is then delivered to Wiley Online Library, and that's what the end users get to see. So, knowledge models, what are they? It's basically our name for Wiley's content classification and enrichment services. So that's what we just, rather than try and say that this encompasses, as I did earlier, thesauri and taxonomies and authority lists, etc., we just call it a knowledge model. These are developed on an individual basis, which makes them really, really flexible and really scalable. So you can start off with a very simple knowledge model, which literally just has maybe a list of categories, or it can be quite complex as well. And I'll show one to you later, which is a bit more complex than just a list of categories. But the knowledge model, the way we've looked at it and the way we've devised it, it can actually it can handle all of this different requirements. So what would normally go into a knowledge model? Well, obviously you need a taxonomy, at least one. But it's also the classification service for ongoing content. So that's any new articles or any new content which is published and coming into us as a publisher. But you also need to have your legacy content classified as well, because otherwise, you know, lots and lots of years of content won't be discoverable using the taxonomy. And there's also a provision of an auto classification service, which we can deliver using our thesaurus management tools, systems and applications, which are provided by Expert AI. I just really briefly want to go into some common misconceptions about taxonomies and search. Now, these are the sort of things that I come across on a regular basis. So I just wanted to quickly go through them. It's like the first one is, oh, don't know about taxonomies. Don't they cost a fortune? Well, quick answer is yes, they can, but they don't have to. They certainly don't need to cost very much at all, apart from, you know, brain power and a bit of time and effort. Another one is, oh, it's going to take years to complete. I talked to one society a couple of years ago and they were expecting it in 2020 not to be delivered until next year. We delivered it within a year. So you can take years to work on these things, but I'd really advise you to be getting on with something more interesting. Don't we need at least 2 or 3 taxonomists to do this work? Because again, it comes back to this conception that taxonomies, building a taxonomy costs loads of money and takes years to complete. So you need more taxonomists. And there are companies that actually almost promote this so that their services look really good, I suppose. I kind of wish that there were more taxonomists in my company, because I'm the only one, and we still deliver good quality taxonomists. So none of these things are necessarily true. Doesn't the taxonomy need to fit the IT systems we have? Again, this does come up, and it's a perfectly valid question, but I always advise to have your taxonomy as an agnostic from your IT systems. Don't let your IT systems drive how your taxonomy is built. built, because if you build your taxonomy as purely a taxonomy or thesaurus, and obviously you're building it in SCOS, then you can add in what, even if your IT systems don't support certain relationships, build them in anyway, because in that way you're future-proofing your taxonomy to when the IT, you know, your systems catch up with what a taxonomy can deliver. And you don't have to go back and do loads of work. Oh, this is one of my favorites. Why can't our search be more like Google? Then we wouldn't need a taxonomy. And this comes up a lot. Basically, most search engines, unless they are Google, can't be like Google, because they're not Google. Google have millions of dollars to throw at what they do, because this is their core business. That's what they do. They have, you know, hundreds of thousands of server farms. They have hundreds and hundreds of employees working on this day in, day out. Wiley's doesn't have that, and most people don't. So that's why it can't be more like Google. But what a taxonomy and a knowledge model can do to help your search engine is deliver faceted search results, because you are adding precision searching to your content simply by classifying it using a controlled vocabulary. So our approach to a new taxonomy request. So the first thing that we would look at when I have a customer come to me with a new taxonomy is there already one in existence in your knowledge domain, in that subject area? Because if there is, let's reuse and recycle. Why, you know, I've actually now lost count of the amount of taxonomies that are out there, both within our own knowledge store and out in the world, that cover geographic regions. The Earth is a finite planet. It's only 7 continents. Just have a standard and use it. And it just saves you a lot of hard work. And that brings me to my second, which is, I can't emphasize this enough, take a pragmatic approach to your building a new taxonomy. And here, keep it broad and shallow. I think I'm quoting Heather Hedden here by saying this, but it is the best way, because taxonomies can be built up and often are built up. And the reason we want to keep it broad and shallow is keep in your head, what is this taxonomy for? You're not trying to cut, when I say you're not trying to classify the entire world, I mean the entire world of microbiotics or molecular biology or whatever your subject area happens to be. You're trying to classify the content that you publish. And try and build in, if you can, reusability. Can it be used for other content sets? Because it's nothing that pleases my heart more than being able to reuse a taxonomy or a knowledge model for a completely different customer, completely different requirements. Always keep the end user in mind, whether that happens to be the reader or the classifier. And this brings me back to the broad and shallow approach. If you have a massive taxonomy with lots and lots of nodes in it, if you're going down different levels to 10, that's a nightmare to 10th narrow term. That is a nightmare to try and navigate, to browse. And the bigger it is, that your taxonomy is, it's the more unwieldy it gets. Is this useful to your end user? If it's not, then don't do it. If you're trying to deliver content in this way. Which brings me to again, the consideration of what's your business context and what's your priority. Because again, I've often headed people off on the path because they want to go away and they want to build this huge taxonomy. And it's just like, well, actually, you've only got 8 in all of your journals. They only come to 8 or 10,000 articles. So applying a taxonomy that is 800 or 1,000 terms is overkill. It's not useful to the end user, and it's not useful to the poor person who's got to be using it as a classifier. make friends with your technology, just because technology is great. We live in the 21st century. Let it help with as much as, if it's designed to help with things like, for instance, synonym suggestions, use it. And for testing and experimenting, just if you've got technology, you know, throw your spreadsheets out the window, use your technology. Don't ever let it scare you or, you know, kind of make you a bit worried. Most technology these days that handles thesaurus management, you can't break stuff in it, and they're made to be user friendly, and they're made to do some really, really clever things without, for instance, resorting to AI or machine learning. They're still very clever. So I've talked about reusing taxonomies, and I've talked about people, customers coming to us with their pre-existing taxonomies. And this was a very short case study of one that we had with a society who came to us with a really old taxonomy, and they kind of weren't certain what to do with it. Would they, you know, just throw it out, or was there a way of rebooting it? Because, I mean, it was old and it's got the wrong SCOS and it had the wrong namespace and it contains old and outdated terms from 25 years ago. Does that really mean it's washed up? So again, it's quite tempting to just throw it out and start again, but that doesn't necessarily, it's not always the right approach, I don't think. So this is the case study. We had a society, and they had a 25-year-old taxonomy, and it had all of these problems. It had more than that. The first thing I did, if you're lucky enough to have technology experts or developers in your workplace, use them to tidy up the SCOS, get it into a workable format so that your systems can cope with it. Then hand it over to, you know, subject matter experts so that they can start giving their own suggestions about, because a lot of the problems with this particular taxonomy were to do with modernizing the terminology. So it was replacing old and redundant terms with the new modern terms, as that were, and sometimes, but also keeping those older terms as a synonym or you know, an alternative label, so that you're not losing the information altogether. Go back to testing technology, keep testing, because you can load up a corpus. Most systems will allow you to test against your the content. Just keep testing it to make sure that it makes sense. If you're using auto classification, have a look at the results before anything goes live. We have stored all of our classifications and taxonomies in GraphDB, which you can interrogate with Sparkle. So it's very simple to just generate a report which gives you a list of concepts within a taxonomy and the number of classifications, auto classifications per concept. You might think, well, what's the point of that? But what it does is it highlights where there are 0 results and where there are many, many results, almost too many to be useful. And that helps you be able to go back to your taxonomy and go, well, 0 results, is that because the term label is in a format which is more like a book title, or is it just not in the content? And if it's not in the content, maybe consider getting rid of it. And the ones that are over classifying, they're probably too broad. So you need to, you know, that means let's have a think about, do we use them for those terms for auto classification? Top level terms that often fall into this category. You don't want them to be used for auto classification because they just classify too many documents and articles, but you still want them to be visible because they're the top level categories. So we apply a rule that just says don't use this term. And also, don't be afraid to delete terms. So again, this is within this context. Trust your data, trust your content. to tell you what is working and what isn't. Again, there can be quite an intellectual gap between what you think is a good taxonomy term and what actually is a good taxonomy term. And try and build in flexibility so that if you're in this position, that you can maintain your taxonomy very easily in the future, because you don't want to repeat these problems. So, you know, and when I say maintain it, that means being able to change terms, add new ones in. Maybe just it depends how fast moving your subject area is, but maybe just do a review every year or so, to make sure it's still up to date and it's still a robust taxonomy. So what happened with this particular one? Well, we deployed it. It's live on Wiley Online, and this is the URL. So it's a society called the American Wastewater Association. They were absolute delight to work with, and just made this project a real success. And talking of successful projects, that brings me to the British Ecological Society, and how we used their knowledge model to be able to improve the precision of searching on Wiley Online, because our search engine is not brilliant, I'm going to be honest, and I think most people will admit that, which is where these knowledge models do really work. So with the BES, they have a drop-down list of topics that represent their subject areas. And so this selection is for botany. So, and these links are part of the taxonomy. So they are already performing a faceted search on classified content. And that gave me 3,500 results, which is an awful lot of articles to wade through. So I then selected a second term, which from the ecological disciplines taxonomy, and added that, and that brought it down to 700, which is still quite a lot. So then I decided I wanted to just know about botany and applied ecology within a specific geographical area, which is Oceania. And it narrowed it right down to 170. But then I decided to apply another term on top of that, which was qualitative methods. And suddenly I went from over 3,500, nearly 3,500 results to 4 very targeted articles to read. And so that's this particular knowledge model, we classified articles going back to 1997. They have 6 journals, and they actually built 7 different taxonomies. So each of these selections came from a different taxonomy. None of these taxonomies are huge. Even the subject area taxonomy is only about a couple of hundred terms, and others are even smaller. But you can see that, hopefully you can see how powerful that is when applied separately. It's allowing the end user to go to actually select different disciplines, rather than putting everything into one taxonomy, separate them out into smaller taxonomies. So very quickly, some other use cases that have come into our department. We had a sales team approached us with an internal sales team. We wanted to know how many times a drug manufacturer had been mentioned in a particular journal articles. This was actually relatively pretty straightforward to do. With the sales team's help, we just compiled a list of manufacturers, made a taxonomy out of that, and then ran an auto classification routine. So they were able to then go into our internal systems and simply extract a report from Pfizer had been mentioned in 150 articles in the last 12 months. And that gave them the kind of information to be able to go to these companies and talk salesy stuff, which I don't understand, to them. Another society, they wanted to create a drugs taxonomy, which was based on the drugs which were referenced in their own articles. They'd already looked at SNOMED, which is part of MESH, but it's massive, you know, it's almost overkill. You'd spend longer weeding out the drugs that are not mentioned rather than the drugs that are. So using Expert AI's technology, the source management system, we were able to basically run an analysis across a body of content that of the society's articles, extract a big list of drugs and then group them into various drug classes and create a taxonomy alongside their subject taxonomy, which I have to say they're really pleased with in the end, because they were a bit defeated. And this is because the SNOMED is huge. And another one is our product team wanted to use a taxonomy to sell slices of a large product. So they'd merged a number of different journals to make this huge product online product to sell to universities and libraries, etc. But there were other customers that only wanted parts of this particular, you know, different subject areas within this product. So we used a taxonomy which divided the product into different subject areas, which were then sat in the background to create, as I say, slices of this big product, which they could then sell for a different price. So very different uses for taxonomies and knowledge models. And so a couple of final thoughts from me. I have to go back to this. It's so important. Let your content tell you what sort of taxonomy you need. The temptation is to just not leave things out. It's okay to leave things out. You can always add them in later on, because a taxonomy is never finished, which sounds scary to people, but it actually makes it a very dynamic tool. And a taxonomy shouldn't be finished. It can, you know, go to sleep for a little while, but don't ever, again, a constant concern that I get from customers is that they have to get it right first time. That's just not true. It's all about experimentation, testing, and going back to let your content tell you what kind of taxonomy you need, because taxonomies are flexible and you can have, as I've mentioned before, a list of categories or deploy multiple taxonomies. It's, you know, it's up to you how you want to do this, and keep friends with your technology. Let it do the hard work for you wherever possible. That's what technology is there for. And on that note, I'll say thank you very much. Thank you for listening to me.